Welcome to Grab Your Gear. This is Joe. This is a show that is created for you, the people that get up every morning, grab your gear, and go to work. And been coming up on a year when we actually started this network. So thanks for joining us. Hopefully you continue to join us as our audience grows and grows and grows. Joining me now is Jack Windsor. Jack, the founder and editor-in-chief of the Ohio Press Network, also the host of the Windsor Report. Heard in Columbus, Ohio on 98.9. You can also stream that show as well. Jack's on in the afternoons and joins us here every week on Grab Your Gear. Jack, how are you?
Joe, I'm super fantastic, although I have to be completely transparent before we went on air. I told you the world's on fire, and it is.
Actually is. I want to go over a couple things and build up to where I think you're taking us, but I want to start with a story that I caught wind of because it was in a testimony in Jim Jordan's committee that he chairs. It's on the weaponization of federal government. I first heard of the committee when Matt Taibbi and Schellenberger, Michael Schellenberger, testified on the Twitter files, which was about almost 2 years ago, believe it or not. And they've been continuing to do things. And this one caught my eye more than anything because they are FBI agents now testifying that they have been compromised. They've been challenged on their allegiance. And a lot of it just boils down to a lot of these guys were put on the January 6th detail. Mm-hmm. And as they were doing the detail, a lot of them they weren't necessarily pushing back, but they said, "You're assigning me stuff that is a misdemeanor." And this is not just one or two people. This is a fairly significant number of agents. And this one, I know Marcus Allan got a fair amount of press. There's a couple of them that have been on podcasts and things. Marcus Allan has spoken up. What caught my eye was not the fact that he was testifying that he was being attacked by his bosses. He was being compromised, his career, the whole thing. Yeah. But it was when they said, "Do you have anything else to say?" And he said he had a warning to the American people. Yeah. And it said basically that my recommendations are in the natural order. First, vote, Allan said. The second is the Second Amendment. Arm yourself and know how to defend yourself. Make 3 or 4 friends in your neighborhood and promise to come to each other's mutual aid in times of hardship. He went on to say, store food, water, and be prepared. His inclination, or at least I believe what he was getting at, no matter who wins the election, either the FBI or just Agent Allan believes there's going to be significant unrest that is going to disrupt this country. What say you?
Well, there's a lot there. I remember the testimony, and now the specialist questioned Marcus Allan. He did regain his security clearance, right?
Yes, he settled the FBI. There was a settlement with his attorneys. They basically didn't want to go on any further with him.
That's right. But the point is, it's the in-between that is devastating. And he said that the FBI questioned his allegiance to the United States, suspended his security clearance, suspended his pay, and refused to allow him to obtain outside employment or even accept charity. So he's playing this waiting game, trying to communicate proactively with the agency, getting nothing back, draining his retirement account. And really, it's because he said, well, how many agents were there on the ground during January 6th? And for that, he was deemed a conspiracist. Now, I think we could probably look back and go, well, he asked a very relevant question, one that still needs to be answered and pumped into the public purview the way that the January 6th Commission was pumped into the public purview, because there is still a lot of low information people who believe that this was an insurrection. Anyone familiar with the law, particularly at the federal level, would say, Supreme Court already decided what constitutes an insurrection, and this certainly doesn't meet that test.
It was a riot.
I digress there. It was a riot, 100% a riot. And so I look at this, and I look at some of the other things going on, which we might talk about here during the show. New York Mayor Eric Adams, former Democrat, Tulsi Gabbard. And there just seems to be a pattern here, whether you're a federal agent, and this should scare the hell out of Americans, whether you're the mayor of one of the largest cities in America or a former presidential candidate for the Democratic Party. If you speak out, if you say something we don't like, we're coming after you. I think that's the moral of the story here. So when you say to me that there is a forecast for unrest after the election, Joe, I think it's by design.
Yes.
And I think it's designed to scare votes away from Trump. And if that doesn't work, to justify the chaos that is planned, that is by design, that is probably already in the works, to create so much chaos and unrest that something profound and not anything like what they cried about and wanted in 2020, which was, a peaceful transition of power. The people who are on the wrong side here, they don't want a peaceful transition of power.
Just so we've talked about this before, but I want to remind people to just understand what you're saying. There was actually a tabletop exercise at the Aspen Institute in 2020 before the election where they actually laid it out, and there were people there from some of the major news networks as well as government officials. And part of what the plan was that they would use civil unrest as a part of their protest if Donald Trump won. Look it up. It's part of the Twitter files. I mean, it's not like it's hard to find this stuff. Just Google Aspen Institute and tabletop exercise, and you'll find all of it there. And to your point, I'm stressing this. Civil unrest was a part of the plan if Donald Trump won then, and it's hard to believe that it wouldn't be part of the plan now, especially when Marcus Allen, Agent Allen, is not a kook. I mean, you watch his testimony. I mean, he's an FBI agent, and so were the others. So the fact that we are being told to arm ourselves and store food by people that don't seem crazy is a little unnerving.
Seems crazy, but it's reality in 2020. What's good is bad, and what's bad is being called good, and that's the world that we live in. And a couple of things come to mind. I remember Vivek Ramaswamy from stage during a GOP presidential debate talking about the deep state, and somebody quizzing him and going, "Oh yeah, well, who's part of the deep state?" And he's like, "Well, it's kind of hard to define." I think it's really, if you go back, I want to, and maybe this is too far in the weeds, but Molly Ball wrote an expose, I think it was February 2021 in Time Magazine, that talked specifically about all of the mechanisms that were in place leading up to the 2020 election. And I'm talking government officials, I'm talking mainstream press, I'm talking social media companies, which TB and Schellenberger's work uncovered on Twitter files. Now we know there's Facebook files, YouTube files, Amazon files. All of these big players that have a lot of money, that have the ability to get a lot of eyeballs and ears reading their stuff and listening to their stuff, they were out front intentionally pushing a narrative that was designed to get Joe Biden in the White House, suppressing, penalizing, and canceling anything that went against that narrative. So I think if you look at and read that article and you think about some of the institutions now where there is radical anti-Israeli protesting going on, you look at some of the mainstream outlets, you look at companies like Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg made a commitment in a letter to Jim Jordan a few weeks back where he said he wasn't going to meddle in elections and do the same thing that they did in 2020. And I called BS on that. I've personally been a victim of their censorship. In fact, so much so that Breitbart contacted me and would like to write an article about it. So here we are all over again in 2024. And so I think one of the things that we ought to do is pay particular attention to who the nefarious and bad actors were in 2020 and make sure that we're not consuming our news and information from them in 2024 and not taken by surprise if they start wielding, the acts of censorship again.
It was about 10 years ago when maybe 12 years ago, when I first met Ben Shapiro. And I remember talking to him about the left movement, and not the Democratic Party movement, but back then they were starting to talk about there is a progressive left, and we talked about that. And I remember we talked about how does it end? Because they normally eat themselves. And if you look at New York City, the Democratic mayor of New York City, Mayor Adams, Tulsi Gabbard, former Democratic member of the House of Representatives,
Mhm.
are just two examples, but they do eventually start to eat themselves. Now, the one about Mayor Adams ties into what we're talking about,
Yeah.
because he not only are they trying to take him out, which I talked to a couple of friends of mine in New York City who file this stuff, and they
Mhm.
said what they're really trying to do to him is stuff that you could do to literally any elected official in city council, the ward bosses, all of that stuff. That there are new rules on how you identify donors, and people are going to be inclined to want to give anonymous donors. So I mean, there's a lot more to it than just he took something. And these are people that are Democrats, by the way, said that Eric Adams is being eaten alive because he pushed back on the immigration thing.
Yeah, and so there's a couple things. I don't want to interrupt you if
No,
you're
go ahead.
there's a couple things that come to mind. Number one, this is on the heels of him standing up and saying, we can't allow this to continue anymore. And by the
Yep.
way, he said that after New York took on a ton of migrants in the heat of a presidential election cycle where Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Sherrod Brown in Ohio, these people seem to have absolutely zero adequate talking points to address the disaster that they caused. And so this to me totally reeks of payback. But what's really interesting is what they're trying to get him on is, this is kind of common, right? But whenever there's money involved, there's like wire fraud, and they're claiming that
Yeah, all
a
that. Yeah,
wealthy foreign business
conspiracy, all
person
that. Yeah, all that crap.
contributed. But here's what's interesting, Joe. You and I have talked about this Act Blue scandal. And the Act Blue scandal touches Sherrod Brown, it touches Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. And if you don't know what we're talking about, the Act Blue scandal, essentially Act Blue is a platform that takes money and donations from people and then it gives it to campaigns, movements, so on and so forth. What has been uncovered, and it's being investigated by Congress, we're doing an investigative research project here at the Ohio Press Network, is that there are people who have come forward. One guy in particular I talked to, he said, I have an email that's registered with Act Blue, but I've received no less than 60 letters from Act Blue over the past 6 months thanking me for my contribution to, first it was Joe Biden, then it was Kamala Harris, then it was Sherrod Brown. And he goes, Jack, I didn't give a dime. So where's that money coming from? What we suspect, and this is a hypothesis, so I got to be careful and state that, is that money is being bundled coming from big donors. Maybe they are foreign national folks. Maybe they are the Soroses of the world. Maybe they are, who knows? But they're coming into this platform and somehow they are being dispensed out to these small dollar donors. And so they're putting this money in the name of small dollar donors and then giving it. So what Eric Adams is going through, newsflash, any Democrat on the left side of the ticket might be going through that because of Act Blue. I mean, that's just something scary to think about.
The other thing that troubles me is they're going after his staff. Okay, look, so I'm back to civil unrest. You're taking out the police commissioner and you're taking out law enforcement officials now. So New York City is going to have to be run by temporary people. Maybe somebody
Yep.
from the federal government will be assigned to New York City. So when I see the warning of the FBI and you see the Mayor Adams situation, and also it's incredible they do it this close to an election. I mean,
Right?
this couldn't wait. Seriously?
I
Because
mean,
that's the other thing.
what do you make of that?
Why now?
Yeah.
That they wanted to do it before the election is what I make of it. Not, I mean, this is something that when you look at it, when you talk to people over there that are in the know, it's puzzling on two fronts. One, he's probably going to get off on this if he gets into court. It's
Right.
probably not going to cost him anything. I mean, once he gets to the appeals process. But two, you're taking out the public safety part, the people who are, supposed to protect the citizens of New York. I don't get it. I mean, because they know there's going to be unrest, and you don't think there's going to be a lot of it in New York City? I mean, come on.
Naturally. It appears that they're trying to try this in the court of public opinion. And this goes to, I mean, I don't know, maybe this guy now understands how Donald Trump feels. This is lawfare. And I
Oh yeah.
think, you can sue anyone in this country, right? And the old adage is you can indict a ham sandwich. Well, what does that mean? It means that, if a group of people that hears only one side of the argument wants to bring somebody in and charge them with something, they can do it because they're only hearing one side of the argument. And so, and talking about a grand jury in that instance. So, this is one of those tactics where I go, okay, they're trying to sway public opinion. And I can't help but think they're trying to scare the hell out of people. And consciously, subconsciously, directly, indirectly, they're showing who they are. Stand up against us, they're saying, and see how that goes for you. Or as they like to say more provocatively, FAFO, Franklin around and find out is how I would say
Yeah.
that.
What is concerning to me is since they've really gone after and used lawfare,
Hmm.
people think an indictment is guilt now. I mean, the way the society, I mean, just the regular people, they think if you're indicted, you're guilty. I mean, in the old
Yep.
days, it used to be you're innocent till proven guilty, and there was a burden of proof. That
Yep.
doesn't exist anymore in the courts right now, which is even more troubling, by the way.
Terrifying. And, the press is quite content carrying the water and doing the bidding of the people who want to bully, besmirch, badger, and belittle an opposing view. And, that to me is kind of in my wheelhouse, and probably you too, Joe. That's what irks me the most about this situation, is that the press has an opportunity here to be fair-minded, to report, hey, an indictment doesn't mean anything. Again, you could indict a ham sandwich. When's the last time you saw an honest reporter write that with respect to Donald Trump or here Eric Adams? They don't do it. And so, there is due process, and due process is a fundamental right that we're afforded in our Constitution, in our rights that have been compiled by the Supreme Court federal case rulings. But this is an opportunity for the press to get it right, and so far they're getting it dead wrong.
When I think about New York City, I think of what the work you've been doing over in Springfield, and
Hmm.
at the core of both of those stories is immigration and the flood of people that are taking
Yeah.
resources away from regular Americans, crime, and all the stuff that comes with it. I mean, uh, all of these stories we're talking about kind of interweave with each other, and it takes us back to Springfield, Ohio. I mean, do you see the consistent issues that we're now facing?
I see the consistent issues, and I'm going to go back to what I said a few minutes ago, Joe. It's by design. I had a chance to visit with Sebastian Gorka Sunday night, primetime on Newsmax, and we talked about Springfield. And one of the things that I wanted to unpack, I think sometimes we get into this habit of talking about, the sizzle headlines. There are 1,600 students that are non-English speaking in the district. There are federal resources that are stretched thin because 20,000 people have been added. And the money that came into that community was based on census numbers from 2020, and those 20,000, or at least not close to 20,000, they weren't there. And then there's the challenges on the roadways because people who can't speak or read English and probably shouldn't get a driving license are driving on the roadways, causing accidents. So you have all of those things. But I wanted to kind of get behind even that, because if you remember, it started out as cats, dogs, geese, right? And that's where
Yep.
the press wanted to take it, and they wanted to deflect everything and categorize it as xenophobic or racist if you talked about those things or you kvetched about migrants. And then we kind of got into, but what are the real outcomes? The real outcomes are the community stretched thin. There aren't enough resources. There's some hostility and tension. People are trying to love each other and make it work, but the government and public officials are gaslighting them by essentially saying, well, this is an economic boon, and if you say anything different, you're racist and xenophobic. But what we've been able to get behind and bringing it around the barn that I shared with Sebastian Gorka is, it appears to me to be intentional, and it is really reverse offshoring. Offshoring is not a popular thing in this country because you can, for pennies on the dollar, build a facility overseas. You can hire cheap labor, and that
Yeah.
can be a boon for your business. What's really going on, it appears, through temporary protected status, through this additional program that we talked about last time, the parole program, it allows businesses and non-government organizations to sponsor migrants and bring them into the country. And when you think about how that's going on in Springfield, and maybe we get into the more details on this in a minute, but how that's happening in Springfield is that they're coming in, and businesses essentially are reverse offshoring. They're getting cheap labor. And in a lot of instances, they're getting that labor through staffing agencies. So for a period of time, up to a year perhaps, they don't have to pay benefits. and the staffing agency's making out, and some of the people that own the staffing agency and other decision makers that know what's going on, they own a bunch of property, and they're stacking a bunch of Haitians in those properties and collecting thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars a month. It is an economic boon for some of the businesses, for the staffing agency, for the landlords. It's not an economic boon for the migrants. It's certainly not an economic boon for the longtime Springfield residents. And that's what I tried to convey on Gorka. And when you think about it, Springfield, Ohio is America. That's one community of 20,000 migrants. Joe, 10 million people have come to this country in the past 4 years.
Where does Springfield, you wrote an article, it was in the Ohio Press Network, about the governor, and he basically just shuts it off, so to speak, doesn't he?
He shuts it off. Yeah, he gaslights. I mean, he did the same thing during COVID. Second verse, same as the first. We've seen this movie before, right? It's here's my position, and all of my experts are telling me that this is right, and shame on you, and boo hoo hoo. And so his solution, Joe, is to send more money, to have pop-up clinics, to send the State Highway Patrol there. What he should be doing is coming forward and saying, you know what? The FBI is now involved. The Ohio Attorney General's Bureau of Criminal Investigations is now involved. And we're looking into some deeper rooted issues in Springfield, like labor trafficking. And we're going to keep you updated on that. And there might be some lessons learned here. And whatever we learn, I'm going to commit as the governor of the state of Ohio to fix those things and make sure that they don't happen again. But you're not hearing an ounce of that because Mike DeWine is a retail politician, and he does what retail politicians do, doesn't accept responsibility, takes your tax dollars and throws it at a problem, and then walks around, shakes hands, kisses babies, and says, hey, look at me, I'm popular because I handed out money.
A couple of other news stories I want to get to real quick. We've got a major strike on the East Coast with the dock workers. According to officials on about every major financial network, we're going to lose between $5 to $6 billion a day because of this dock workers strike. The union has decided to strike. They're asking for somewhere between 50 and 70% pay increase and a guarantee that there will be no automation on the docks. Politically, what do you think happens? I mean, this is probably not the most timely thing for the Biden administration and Harris.
It is for the unions. It's great, sure. Right? I mean, this is a great bargaining chip for them, and they're going to do, come hell or high water, they're going to essentially capture the supply chain and say, do it our way or else. So no, probably not good for Biden Harris. I think what's interesting there is they're saying, hey, no automation on the docks. Yeah. Can you imagine if voters said, hey, no automation at the voting booth, we want paper ballots? They'd get laughed out of, the world, but the union can do it and it's okay. Again, two ways of thinking, two different tracks of justice and reasoning. But no, this is a big deal. And to me, it sounds and feels a lot like, we remember during COVID when things shut down and the supply chain, it took years. Yes. I know a lot of business owners, it took, whether if you're a builder, if you repair things, getting the materials that you needed in order to do the jobs that you needed to do, it was awful. And this looks a lot like it. And so I expect that, all stops will be pulled. I think that, if you're Biden Harris, you're going to do everything that you can within your power to try to get the unions to not stop the supply chain. We'll see. I think it could be chaos, but keep in mind, these people thrive.
Where's your, I saw an interview with the Department of Commerce Secretary, I forget her name. She was oblivious to it, which was even more disconcerting. It was like, yeah, I haven't really been involved in those discussions. I'm thinking, oh my God, you're the Commerce Secretary, and we're about to burn $6 billion a day. That's frightening.
Well,
you talk about
Gina Raimondo, and if my memory serves me correctly, and you can fact check me on this, I think this is the same woman that spent time before the Senate and really wanted to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's and making sure that if the government purchased things through RFPs and projects, that the businesses have to be allowing LGBTQ plus activism to thrive, and men to call themselves women and women to call themselves men, and so on and so forth. She's got that under control, but to hell with the supply chain.
Tonight, the vice presidential debate, Waltz and Vance, does it mean anything?
I think that it is going to mean something to the press. It gives us something to write about. I think the person that has the most to lose here is Tim Walz because, the left and their pals in the press have painted JD Vance as weird. I've gotten to know JD Vance over the past 3 years. He's not weird. For those people who question why he was picked by President Trump, for the people who talk about wanting a democracy, well, if you want a democracy, you want somebody who represents the will of the people, right? And so JD Vance is most aligned with Donald Trump. And that's what the Republican people want. They want an America First candidate. They want somebody who talks straight, who has a firm position, and that's JD Vance. But he's taken on a lot of flack from the press and from the left. But Tim Walz is not who he appears to be. And I think that JD Vance can score some points tonight by pointing to his completely left wing. I mean, this guy is pro LGBTQ plus activism. He wants teacher unions and activist groups and pseudoscience in our schools to influence our kids. He wants the government to have more authority in talking to and teaching, training, and developing our kids than parents. And, here's a guy who says that the First Amendment really is dangerous because with the First Amendment, you can convey misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. I mean, he's a full-on Marxist authoritarian. And I think if JD Vance plays it well, he can probably score some points there. But all of that to say, VPs don't win or lose elections.
Going to wrap it up. Your documentary, episode 2 that you're in, The Union Hustle, comes out on Thursday. Episode 1 is out. This is on a concept called project labor agreements, which are basically tools to funnel money. Basically, I watched the kind of the screener. Basically, Jack, looks like you guys investigated this. It's a tool to funnel money from government projects right back to the union. I mean,
Yeah.
in a nutshell.
In a nutshell, project labor agreements allow the cost of things to be about 20% higher. And if you're a taxpayer, what that means is if the government's going to build something and they use a PLA, it's going to be 20% more expensive. Now, given the Bidenflation, Kamalanomics environment we live in now, that's real money. And so I think people are going to go, well, wait a minute, why are we paying 20% more? And then there are a lot of, inner workings with the unions and merit shops that even if merit shops are used, unions still end up banking money. And what we're finding is that unions often have war chests of money that finds its way back to certain politicians and certain causes. Now, on the government side, government unions, that's almost monolithically Democrats. But I think people might be surprised what that looks like on, the private side, organized labor, and where that influence might be right now. So I'm looking forward to the release of part 2 and all 5 parts of this docuseries.
You're going to do some interviews with some state representatives on that very topic, I believe, aren't you?
I am, and I'll give you a little teaser here. In the state of Ohio, I think there's this belief that Democrats are largely funded by the unions and they get a lot of money, but I think people are going to be surprised at how much Republicans get, and we're going to get the responses from Republicans as to why they're getting that type of campaign aid and what that means to the decisions they make inside the State House.
I'll be anxious to talk to you next week after you've done that to see what kind of reception you get, because I wonder if anybody's ever walked down there and asked him those questions.
Well, we're going to do it. We'll see how it goes.
Jack Windsor, appreciate it as we do every week. You join us, and appreciate you joining us this week as well. What's coming up on your reporting on the Ohio Press Network that we should keep our eyes open for? What are you working on?
Yeah, so there's 2 big things right now. We're still reporting on Springfield. Uzra Nomani, who is the writer for the Jewish Journal, she wrote a groundbreaking report a few weeks back. She's been on the ground since then. We've been in close communication almost on a daily basis. And so I don't want to say that she's a surrogate or I'm a surrogate of her, but we're certainly cooperating and collaborating.
She is a former Wall Street Journal reporter, if I am correct?
Former Wall Street Journal reporter. And so I'll be releasing information on her latest report. I'll have her on the Windsor Report, 98.9 FM, The Answer. And then the other big story very quickly is that, federal rules regarding religion and the government are in the First Amendment. Westerville City Schools here in Ohio, they just voted yesterday unanimously, their Board of Education, to take down a rule or policy that allows students to go off campus and attend what's called LifeWise Academy. That seems to be in violation of not only the First Amendment, but Supreme Court decisions. So that was a very hot button topic last night. We've reported on it today, and I know that we'll have a lot more reports on that. And this affects not only Westerville, Ohio. This is a precedent that will have, reaching implications here in Ohio for students that want to go off-site and get some sort of religious instruction during the day.
That's across the country that's available.
100%.
I mean, that's 100%. Not just an Ohio thing.
No.
What? And I know you got to go, but why do school board members give a damn when it's something off campus, when it's their time, parents agree? You know what I mean? It's because you could literally have the Satan worshiping committee meet on school grounds nowadays, but this is basically just a faith-based group that you can go for once a week for an hour or whatever. They pick you up, you go, and it's like a Bible study.
It is. And so two things real quick. What you mentioned is not fabricated. In the Cincinnati area a couple of years ago, there was a after-school group, Satan after-school group. And, parents in that district didn't attend, didn't send their students, but they were wise enough, at least the conservative ones, to go, hey, we can't outlaw this because we understand the First Amendment. But here we are a couple of years later, and you actually have board members who, by the way, should be trained, should be instructed, should understand the First Amendment. I don't know who dropped the ball in Westerville, but this is embarrassing, I believe, because first of all, state education agencies are supposed to report to the U.S. Department of Education. There are religious excusals that are allowed. There's an Equal Access Act in the United States law books, and there's the Every Student Succeeds Act, that an Elementary and Secondary Education Act that federal dollars are tied to. And if you're in violation of religious permissions, if you violate those permissions, you can actually get your funding cut off. Now, the left likes to use those tactics and not tell you the truth. I'll tell you the truth. That would take time. There would be appeals. But the reality is impinging upon somebody's First Amendment right to the free exercise of their religion based on Supreme Court holdings and the First Amendment can make you vulnerable for losing federal funding. And Westerville City Schools is now up for a levy. So they're asking voters to give them more money. Meanwhile, they're putting themselves at risk for losing federal funding for an ignorant decision of their board members. But to answer your question, Joe, finally, you said, why are they doing it? I think they're useful idiots. If you look at one of the groups behind what's going on in Westerville, it's a group that they want you to think it's a grassroots organization. It's not. It's AstroTurf. What that means is that the people who support it, the funding that supports it, it's coordinated. It comes from a much larger organization, but it's intended to look like it's this grassroots thing. It's not. These are progressives. These are Marxists. These are people who don't want religion or conservatism in any part of our world. And unfortunately, there are probably, I would call them bored, secularist, low information, suburban people who are on the board who are just ignorant and they're being used as useful idiots. The problem that they're going to run into is when the movement is done with them, they'll be the target next. So this is a big deal in Westerville.
Did parents raise hell at this meeting last night, or
they did? I sent a reporter. I was working on some stuff behind the scenes, but there were a lot of people there, many there in support. The speakers were far outnumbered negative, meaning the people who wanted this policy ripped down, there were more of them than the people who spoke in favor of it. But I think attendance was actually the opposite. But I've sent an open letter to the board members and the superintendent, quoting the law, asking some very hard questions about the First Amendment, whether their funding is at risk, and if there are other opportunities that students have, whether it be extracurricular activities, other clubs, that occur, because if those things go on, then this religious programming has to happen. If not, they're in violation of the U.S. Constitution.
Well, one thing's for sure, there's a war on God in this country, and who to thunk it? Jack, thanks for joining us again this week. You and I will be working on a number of projects throughout this week. Be in touch. In the meantime, thank you for Tuning in to Grab Your Gear this week. I am Joe. Appreciate you being here. Remember, support your merit shop workers. Those are people who are out there working and they get promoted based on merit. And that's the network that we started with, joining those people that get up and grab their gear and go to work every day. If you're one of them, thanks for joining us. Spread the word. We're here on the Grab Your Gear Network. In the meantime, till next week, for Jack and Apprentice Isabella, our producer, I am Joe, and we'll talk to you next week back here on Grab Your Gear.